Welcome to Season 5 of the Prosthetics and Orthotics podcast with yours Peels and Brent Wright. We're bringing in industry experts, patients, vendors, and thought leaders to share their stories, insights, and visions for the future. Whether you're a clinician, a researcher, a vendor, or someone with a personal interest in the field, we have something for you. Join us as we delve into how advancements in personalized healthcare and 3D printing are revolutionizing the industry and changing the way we approach the design, production, and delivery of prosthetic and orthotic devices.
Hi everyone, this is another episode of the Prosthetics and Orthotics podcast. My name is Joris Peels, and with me, as always, is Brent Wright. Hey Brent.
Hey Joris, good to be on. I'm really excited about this podcast, but what was very interesting, a new magazine article came out talking about definitive sockets in prosthetics, and I thought that was very interesting. And believe it or not, it had a test socket and two flexible inner sockets, so there were no definitive stuff on the front page. But hey, at least we're talking about it. And one of those flexible inners was actually a flexible inner that we created for a guest that we had on, Richard Blaylock, the marathon runner.
Oh.
So that made it on the front cover. And the other thing that was on the front cover was a test socket from Filament Innovations and Mike Gorski. So that, hey, I think we're doing pretty good in the 3D printing space, having some of those people on.
Yeah, super nice. I think it's good that people are trying to notice the wider prosthetics, industry, let's say, is taking notice of additive as well.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the things, and we'll get into it with our guests here in a little bit, is this idea of design. And I know we talk about it quite a bit, but it's starting to get a lot of traction and a lot of thought into, you're designing for FDM, designing for powder-based fusion. In fact, yesterday, it was a complete spur of the moment thing. I went live on LinkedIn. I did a little 12-minute thing on what to look for when you're designing for powder-based fusion. And that's one of the best performing posts I ever did. And there was I was like, do I really want to do this? And we did it. And so there's definitely an interest in what makes good design.
Yeah. By the way, okay, this is really weird that you know a ton about the rest of, about this subject and you're pushing it, but also like the rest of the world says powder bed fusion, right? And you call it powder base fusion. And people are now starting to call it powder base fusion because you were doing this.
Hey, that's fantastic.
and it's like I still never understand it. And but you and now it's people are starting to say it to me, and I'm like, what? No, Brent, no,
Brent, you're screwing up the whole thing.
and it's but I love that you teach so many people 3D printing, and you help so many people with the stuff. So I think it's wonderful. So we have a sponsor for this episode. And Brent, can you tell us about the sponsor? Is it a reputable company? Are they nice? Could I trust them?
Yes, Joris, you could trust them, and they're a reputable company.
Really?
The Advanced 3D is the title sponsor for Season 5. And, it's near and dear to my heart because I'm a part of it along with Paul and Tyler. And really what we're trying to do is come alongside of clinicians and help them with a digital workflow. So they may be interested in starting, but they don't know where to start. And there's so many options. We've had a ton of even vendors on our show, and it's like, okay, which way do you go? One way may be more appropriate, more cost effective than another way, and it all depends on your clinic mix and what you've got going. And so we love the training side of things, but then we also have a couple really fun things that add value to a clinic. And one of those things is flexible TPU, multi-jet fusion TPU, flexible liners. And we had Richard Blaylock on earlier in a few seasons ago, talking about how it made a difference in his marathon training. And so I just think that there are some very easy steps that people can take. One of them being low risk flexible inner liners that give a dynamic comfort to patients. And that's one of the things that we do, and we do very well, and it's fairly cost effective. So We do a lot of things, but when you kind of boil things down, those are the things that we like to do: is come alongside of you, figure out where you need to go on your digital journey, and then we can also help out with these flexible interliners.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Brent, for sponsoring us. Oh, so who do we have on the show today?
Well, I'm really excited to have Jason Bender on the show today. He's a certified prosthetist, and he has a definitely unique story that I'm looking forward to getting into in providing prostheses for those less fortunate. And he'll kind of get into that. He is a designer as well. He's taught himself how to use Fusion 360, and he also does some FDM 3D printing. And I connected with him, man, it's been probably 3-4 years ago, and he was developing a hand specifically for the developing world, and I ended up printing it on Multijet Fusion and delivering it in Guatemala. Went really well, and so I want to dive into that with Jason a little bit too. But I think he brings an interesting perspective on what additive manufacturing can do for the prosthetic and orthotic industry, not only for the developing world, but now for the developed world. He's moved back to the U.S. with his family and actually works for East Point Prosthetics and Orthotics. Just started really just a couple weeks ago, and really looking forward to hearing what he has to say.
Okay, all right. So welcome to the show. And so, Jason, tell us how'd you got started in prosthetic and prosthetics and orthotics? How did you get into this?
Yeah, thanks, guys. I appreciate you having me on. My introduction to prosthetics and orthotics didn't really happen until university. I was doing my undergrad in engineering, and thought I wanted to, design airplanes or something really incredible like that. But kind of got through the process maybe about halfway through between my sophomore and junior year. Had some opportunities through my church and also through some internships through the university, some opportunities to go overseas and have some of those experiences. And just really started questioning how this profession I was moving towards really maybe whether it aligned or not with where I thought I wanted to be in life. Just having those regular person-to-person touches, having an impact, maybe in places where people are underserved or don't have access to some of the same resources. And so when I started to have some of those questions, it was my advisor in college, I guess, who had, prior to becoming a professor, had worked for one of the big prosthetic manufacturers in the US as a design engineer. And he was the one who kind of steered me towards prosthetics. So I did my first prosthetic internship that summer in the US and just really loved it. And then had another opportunity to go to Bangladesh as a summer intern between my junior and senior year of college. And that's just, where I kind of really fell in love with the idea of doing prosthetics overseas. Just obviously the need was huge, but also just the level of innovation and creativity required to practice in those kind of places really appealed to me. That was one of the things that really got me into engineering, was just that kind of desire to design and be innovative, and just to see the opportunity and the need for that overseas. Really just kind of solidified that's the direction that I wanted to head. So that's kind of my general path into prosthetics and orthotics from the beginning.
And where have you worked overseas then?
So I finished my prosthetic training and got certified in 2014. And then back then it was just me, my wife, and we had one kid at the time. We moved to Myanmar, or Burma, as they call it in the US, in the fall of 2014. So we were initially, I went to partner with a couple different nonprofits working over there that were running prosthetic clinics primarily for victims of landmine accidents. And my role was primarily to train new local people in how to make and to provide the prosthetic devices for that population.
Okay, wow. And that was, have you traveled? You said you'd been to Bangladesh before. Yeah, have you traveled extensively before that, or were you kind of all of a sudden just like boom in Myanmar?
Um, yes and no. Yeah, I mean, I've had maybe three, like two, like maybe like kind of the typical 1 week, 2 week short term trips to different places, and then the Bangladesh was a bit longer, like a 2 month stay, just kind of interning in the limb and brace shop at a hospital there. And but yeah, I mean, we had never been actually inside Myanmar until we moved there, and so yeah, it just kind of went. You hit the ground and you moved into an apartment. It was like, wow, yeah, this is it. This is our life now.
Okay, and that must have been a pretty leap because, like, okay, also for your wife with a kid, it's not like you're doing this as a college student by yourself kind of thing. That must have been a pretty tough thing for you guys to do as a family, take that decision to leap into like this unknown, right?
Yeah, well, so I mean, actually, my wife is the primary reason that we ended up in Myanmar specifically. One of her best friends growing up lived had moved their whole family moved to Thailand along the border, and they had kind of gotten some experiences with the Burmese refugee population coming across the border. And my wife had the opportunity to visit them a couple times, and so that's kind of how Myanmar even got on our radar to begin with. So this was definitely something that she was really interested in as well. She's a nurse. She was interested in doing community-based health training in Myanmar, and that's kind of how Myanmar got on my radar. But yeah, as a family, yeah, it's at one point I think in college I thought I wanted to be part of these clinics. They're kind of like backpack clinics that just walk across into the jungle from Thailand and just do really, really remote kind of stuff. And I remember, soon after college, and dating my wife thinking maybe that's what we want to do. But then suddenly, you have a kid in the picture and carrying a, kid in a baby backpack. That suddenly changed that whole vision of what maybe you were expecting. So yeah, it was a big transition for us. But it was a really exciting time too. Just diving into a new culture, learning a new language, and learning a prosthetic system that looks very different than the one I had left in the U.S.
Okay, and what kind of prosthetics were you able to do there? Because were you able? Are they much simpler? What kind of how does it compare to the U.S. stuff that people are more familiar with?
So it varies. It varies by organization and it varies by location. Obviously, logistics play a big role in what type of materials and devices are available. But the one thing I always laugh about is that in O&P school, they had us do one PTB cuff strap. And they say, you just have to do this for school. You'll never do another one again, but, just get through it. And, that's probably 85% of 90% of the types of devices that were being fit over there. So a lot of what we were doing was more, just like polypropylene sockets. And they did have different versions of adjustable pylons. So that was a big help, especially in training and just getting a really good fit. But yeah, I've done trainings in some, jungle clinics where they're literally making wooden ankles just from trees they're cutting down and doing kind of the old school exo kind of alignments and stuff. And so it really varied, but yeah, it was definitely, I mean, I guess most people would call it kind of a rewind in technology as far as going back to stuff that we haven't fit in the US for a long time.
Okay. And were you able to introduce some new techniques or new things you learned in the States, or was it just like the gap in income and the gap in getting stuff was just too much, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, some of it was, dictated obviously by logistics and resources. And so some of it was, the polypropylene socket and the vulcanized rubber, satch foot, for lack of a better term, was just what they could afford, what was sustainable there. And so there wasn't like a ton of, at that time, new like big shifts in what we were providing. But I think that Some of the things I tried to do. So we would like laminate a cosmetic cover over top the polypropylene once we had finished. We're ready to go definitive. And so when I would train new clinicians, they had only ever seen a skin colored prosthesis. And so that's kind of what everybody just assumed that prosthetic wearers wanted. And so when we did our training and we were just kind of doing these sample legs, I said, just go to the market and pick out a fabric, a traditional fabric, a t-shirt, whatever you want. And when it'll be kind of this memento of our training that you'll have this prosthesis that is laminated to look like this fabric you picked. And so when the students would, or the clinicians would finish their training, we just kind of, put their legs on the shelf in different places in the clinic. And we didn't really try to force it on anybody. We wanted to meet people where they were at. I think that's a really important thing. But we also wanted to just kind of subtly show people that there's different options out there. And we actually had a couple clients come in and be like, "Oh man, you can make a camouflage leg," or "Oh man, I could get the traditional Karen fabric on my leg. That's really cool." And I didn't realize you could do that. And, slowly there was kind of this trickle down of where one person would do it and then another person would see them in the clinic and realize that other people were doing it. And it was kind of this, kind of compounding effect where people were starting to have choices that they didn't really think they had before. And so that was really exciting. And something that we tried to do, in whatever clinic I was training at. And then a lot of it was just more just good clinical practices and kind of understanding. The local clinicians are really good. They were really good at what they did, but just helping them understand the more of the why of certain adjustments or the why of certain buildups. And so, one of the big ones I really focused on was trying to future-proof sockets. So we'll put a build up over some of the bony prominences, but we're, with the thought that, this person will probably shrink up and fall down a little deeper before I see them again. So let's pull the build up down a little lower. So those kind of just little tweaks, were more common than, the kind of these big top down changes that were made.
And what do you think, just give me an idea, so you seem to have kind of done this a lot, on your own initiative. It wasn't like you just signed up for some organization and then just got sent there, right? So a lot of this was your own thing. So how did you arrange that, let's say? Because that would seem quite daunting in and of itself as well, right?
Yeah. So we, so once I realized that I wanted to do prosthetics and that I wanted to kind of take that overseas, I kind of made this short list of countries that were in need of prosthetists. So, a lot of, recent conflict kind of situations. And then obviously meeting my wife, that list kind of got narrowed down to where we were really serious about Myanmar. So we're also Christian. So obviously our faith plays a big part in our decision to move overseas. And so we got partnered up with a Christian mission organization, and they kind of did some scouting for us in the region. So the scouting that they had done, they had met this foreign doctor in Myanmar, and he had said that, "Oh yeah, there's a huge need for a prosthetist and a nurse. I mean, we could get them on the ground tomorrow. That'd be great." And we showed up, and the report was more like, "There's just a huge need for your type of people, but we don't actually have a job description. There's not we're not running a clinic right now." So we, it's kind of this first week, we thought this is what we were going to do for the rest of our life. And it turned out that there wasn't this actual concrete job opportunity. And so, so then I just kind of ended up going around to the different organizations that I knew were in the country, and just saying "Hey, this is my training," that we're doing prosthetics, and just saying, "Hey, this is my training. This is, we think we want to be here, for long term. Do you have any sort of need for, another clinician or a trainer or something like that?" And that's kind of how I began to make connections to these different clinics where I was able to work and provide that training. But it was a pretty, it was a little bit disillusioning for a little while, but once we got kind of into the system, then we started to be able to have more opportunities.
Okay, and if you just have somebody like that's listening right now, like, oh wow, I'm going to do that. Are there any like really key tips you have in advance before doing this? How do I, for example, prepare myself for this? Is there something I can do in the States while I'm waiting to go somewhere else? Or
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that there are. Yeah, I mean, East Point's a great example. I think East Point is a shameless plug here, but is a great example of a local company where you can gain the experience that you need to be a qualified clinician and trainer, but also a organization that has kind of a global focus and has opportunities to get overseas. If you wanted to partner with some of the people that work here partner with. Yeah. And so I think like finding, that was when I went to do my residency, that was something that I just put on the table. And I told companies when I was interviewing, like, this is kind of where I see my life going. If that's not kind of part of your company heartbeat, then yeah, it'll be kind of difficult for us to make this work. So I think that, was something that I really look back on, positively, of like, being open about that, and to my excitement, finding companies that, are doing residencies that were like, hey, yeah, well, we'd love to train you. And, when you feel ready to go, we'll release you to do that. And so I think that's a big thing. Just kind of putting that on the table up front. And I think you'll be surprised in the O&P field that, that's other people's heartbeat too. And they're not going to shy away from that. And then I think another thing in hindsight, I don't know, there's always this like toss up between, getting out and doing it while you can, while you're young, before, everything else in life piles up. But also this kind of toss up between that and like how much experience is enough before you go. And sometimes I wish I had stuck around longer in the States and really shored up things. I guess had I known that, week 2, I was going to be teaching some brand new clinicians from scratch, that I just kind of got this like, imposter syndrome, like, who am I? I just kind of got this certification not too long ago kind of thing. So there are those kind of debates, and I'm pretty, empathetic to kind of both sides of those, but I would just really strongly, suggest that people choose residencies where volume is something that you're going to see, and that you can get to feel like a really comfortable before you head over, because you may not have those resources there.
Okay. And also, but I'm also thinking you were quite like really young in the beginning of your career. Were there also moments where you're like, oh, wow, I would like to have another 10-year more experience before getting myself into this? Or would you say to people like, no, do this when you're young, because you're not going to do it when you're like older? Or
yeah, I suppose I don't have. Yeah, I think I can see it either way. I think that there's advantages to both, and I think that while we were, young and could put ourselves out there, and we'd hike out to these clinics to do 2-week trainings in these in the middle of the jungle, and and that was something that we were before we had now we have 4 kids, and that's not our life anymore. Unfortunately, that can't really be our life anymore, and so. Yeah, I think there's a trade-off in both ways. But I just think that for me, sometimes I wish I had, especially I think everybody, a lot of people can do, like a lot of people feel comfortable with transtibials, but I think like where a lot of your value comes is coming in and coming alongside somebody is, how comfortable you feel with kind of non-standard fittings, how comfortable you feel with, transfemoral fittings, those kind of things. And so I would say, your value as an outsider to the system is those kind of opportunities to get more experience in those areas. So yeah, I think that there's a definite balance, but like I said, I guess I can see both sides of it in some ways.
And also like I'm a bit curious, like, okay, so you're literally in the jungle in a kind of very warm, very, very humid country. Does that change everything a lot as well as in the fabrication process, or does it change a lot for the type of prosthetic or stuff like that?
In some ways, yeah. I mean, we had organizations reach out to us that wanted to do, like a silicone liner, just like a pin locking system, and there were just some clinics and some environments where that just wasn't a really viable solution for us. It's just way too hot, way too humid. the situation where the people are is just way too rural. Like there's just not enough follow up to be able to keep up with, replacing liners and things like that. The lack of like consistent electricity was always like a big limiting factor in what we did. I mean, one of the first trainings I did, we went out to this, jungle clinic, and the guys were hacking trim lines with a machete, and I guess let me back up. I was looking at some of the sockets they had made, and I just noticed like some of the lines were really straight, the corners were pretty sharp. And so I kind of like the first or second day, I just pulled them all aside, and I kind of, drew out the trim lines on someone's leg. And I was like, look, this is why the relief's here. It's got, it curves around the patella, and this is, these are the reliefs we do for the hamstring. And if they're sharp, then we're going to get impingement and things like that. And then, the next day they come in, and the guy hands me the machete, and he said, well, can you show us how to cut these curvy trim lines with a machete?
Wow.
And I was just like, no, I can't. Like, we didn't learn that in O&P school. And so I think that, they were on this situation where they were kind of had the village was run on a generator, and it was rationed. And so there were times of the week where they weren't, afforded to use the electricity. And so those were all limiting factors, and you had to be really creative about how you got around those. So we had to kind of, come up with some compromises and say, hey, like this trim line isn't going to look, exactly like I would expect it to, but, how can we minimize the problems that you're seeing from it? And they, there were days they'd do a lamination, without a vacuum, which is something not, I learned in school that, you should probably never do, but, they figured out ways to at least, it's probably heavier than it should be because they're flooding it to make sure it's, getting all impregnated and whatnot. But yeah, there were ways around that, but it certainly, limited some of the choices and device options that we had. Transfemoral especially, it's just, not having the clinical support as far as like therapy and these guys who want to go back and, climb up a mountain and do their logging work or whatever, and just, having to decide whether we really had the resources to support a good outcome there, or whether we were expecting too much out of the, the types of, single axis Red Cross knee that we had or whatever. Those were, decisions we constantly were making.
Yeah. I'd love to dive just a little bit into the technicalities of the sockets and like some of the things that you kind of the non-negotiables and the negotiables and maybe even some material selection. So let's just start off with the transtibials. I mean, what in your mind made a appropriate technology transtibial socket?
So we obviously, doing the thermoplastic, I think that just giving kind of that constant, ability to, because in a resource limited setting, you don't have this ability to constantly be making check sockets or constantly be replacing sockets. And so I think that the thermoplastics obviously were a big part of being successful. Just obviously the amount of adjustability, and I mean it's hard to say just because I've been in so many different locations that had different access to different things, and so I think from building up local clinicians, like I think that alignable componentry just just helps them, gives them that boost that they, like you can make a slightly wrong alignment adjustment, and you can go back and you can fix it. And so that, that was one of the really difficult things in some of those really rural clinics where they were doing basically exo, and it was just like so labor intensive to get adjustments right. There was just like a lot of, there could be a lot of fatigue around, getting a really solid alignment, which these people needed because it was uneven terrain. There was huge gap between visits, and so I just felt like being able to have components where the clinicians weren't getting worn out trying to dial that in exactly right was really important. feet were like always just our nemesis. We just couldn't get feet that were, cosmetically acceptable, that also lasted long enough, between being able to see people. And so, I just, one anecdote that always sticks in my mind is one of these jungle clinics. A couple of the guys just asked for their the toes of their rubber foot just to be chopped off, because it was easier to have us align it and and set up the socket to walk that way than it was to go for 3 months and then have their toes fall off, as they always seem to do. And so, yeah, I think that was like something we were always battling, is just like there just wasn't a good, we just couldn't find a foot that like just held up to what they wanted it to do, what they needed it to do, but was also affordable and kind of, everybody wants to wear flip flops there, so it's got to have toes, got to have a split toe, and obviously, for a lot of them, cosmetic appearance was a big part of it too. So that was just like something I never felt like we got a perfect answer to. And yeah, it was definitely something that we struggled with all the time.
So components, as far as, were they donated components? Did you buy them in country? Did you buy them? How did you get your stuff?
Yeah, so different clinics did different things. So there were certain clinics that were able to kind of piggyback off of. So like the Red Cross kind of has their own system that they do, but in some really difficult access places, they were allowed some clinics to kind of piggyback off of some of their stuff. So that was, they were buying those components from the Red Cross, but through donor funding. We didn't do any in any of the clinics I was in. We didn't do any like donated old devices. It was all either like the aluminum pylons we would purchase from China, and the plastic would come from Thailand and things like that. So we didn't do any of the like, getting people to donate their old prostheses or anything. So yes, and then a lot of the feet were, like I think one of the popular feet that's used in Myanmar is manufactured in Cambodia, just like a rubber vulcanized foot. So those were all purchased, and most of the clinics that I was training in, at least early on, were all just like donor funded.
And how long did you end up staying in Myanmar?
So we were 8 years about. So my first 4 years was primarily kind of as a training consultant. I lived mostly in one town called Taungu, which is kind of in the middle of Myanmar, training at a clinic there. But I also traveled, like I said, to some of these jungle clinics to give trainings. And then the last 4 years, we were in a city called Taunji, which is it's the capital of the Northeast, but it's kind of in the middle of the country. And there we were trying to start since like 2019, I guess we were trying to start what we were hoping would be kind of a sustainable business model that local clinicians could take up for themselves. And so that was kind of like the last 3-4 years. So 8 years altogether. And then in 2020, I'm going to get these dates all mixed up, but I think February 2021, there was a military coup, and the situation. I mean, we had 3 little kids by then, and unfortunately, so COVID kind of rolled into that, and between COVID and then rolling into that, just with our kids, it just became just a situation we couldn't hit. It wasn't healthy for our family, so we had to leave. And then we spent about a year in Thailand, kind of helping from the other side until we moved back to the U.S. So 8 years kind of end to end.
Okay, and through that period, I'm interested in this business model thing, because I've talked about this with Brent a number of times, like how to make some kind of, like, Brent's super convinced about that going to places works, but also he wants to train people to stay there and then continue the work. So tell us about the business model you devised that you were trying to implement at the end there.
So we, I think the short and trite kind of way we like to explain what we were trying to do was, we called it like Robin Hood prosthetics. So we had found out that there was a pretty big population of Myanmar people that had the money and the means to like fly to Singapore and Bangkok and get, more quote unquote traditional prosthetic devices, high tech prosthetic devices, and so we felt like because me and a Swiss colleague who's still there in Myanmar thought that with our training, but also our cultural adaptation and our ability to speak the language, we thought that maybe there was this unique opportunity where we could create a service where those people would choose to stay in Myanmar and kind of do like a cost sharing model in order to offset some of the more kind of the type of devices that most of the nonprofits were trying to do. And so I realized that that's not that's like that. There's at some point where the cost sharing will max itself out, and also that's not necessarily an opportunity for every country. But we felt like that was kind of a specific niche that we saw in Myanmar that maybe could be where these high level devices were kind of sustaining the total work without kind of neglecting the huge need for more affordable, appropriate devices for people who couldn't afford them or needed a really low cost device. And I would say another experience I had that really kind of pushed me in that direction was we used to travel to this lake. It's called Inle Lake. It's one of the big kind of tourist attractions in Myanmar. But I had met a guy there that was born missing 3 of his limbs, and so he's missing both of his arms and a leg below the knee. And he had taught himself how to paint with his foot, and so he painted kind of the traditional lacquerware at the market, and that was his occupation. But I got talking to him about we were toying around opening a clinic. And what he thought about that, and whether he thought he'd be able to pay for a device, or what just trying to get just kind of get his feedback on some of our ideas. And he said 2 things that really kind of really pushed us in this direction. Is one is his transtibial device was no longer appropriate, but he had gotten it provided 7 years ago by this organization that had gathered enough money to fly to Myanmar, drop off a bunch of legs, and then they said, hey, when we get enough money, we'll come back. Well, it had been 7 years, and he said, if I have to pay somewhere else, I'll just wait for these people to come back. And I don't know that they ever did or they ever will. I'm not here to, I don't even know the names of that organization, not here to throw stones or whatever, but just that kind of like helped, solidify the idea that, like there needs to be this idea of kind of permanence and people know, when all else fails, I know where the clinic is. I know somebody's going to be there and I know how to get this adjusted. And then the other thing that happened is when we started talking about price, a couple of the other shopkeepers that sold at the market came walking over and they were like, hey, we pool our money all the time for medical expenses. This lady across from him, she just had a stomach surgery and we all pooled together $400 so that she could have stomach surgery. And so if this comes down to price, like, yeah, we've got our own little, financial methods of making that work. And so I think that's where we realize that, sometimes we step into situations and just assume that this has to be free or, this person doesn't want to or can't pay for this. And yeah, I mean, there's people like that. I'm not trying to say that that there's anything wrong with what nonprofits do, but I think that those kind of 2 highlights, really kind of helped us see like, hey, maybe there is an opportunity here, and there's definitely a need to make something that will last. One of the things is Myanmar's had a civil war since 1960, and so donors get really tired. They want solvable solutions, and I get that. But also, like, prosthetics is not a once and done thing, and so it can be really exhausting running a nonprofit and trying to keep donors interested and do right by your clients and all that at the same time. And so that's why we, kind of some of the big deciding factors of why we wanted to push this more sustainable model.
Okay, yeah, I think the donor fatigue thing, and yeah. That's always going to be an issue like that. But how much would it cost? How much would one of these devices cost there? Like, have you calculated just like how much would it cost with the labor and everything to do this? Because the thing, I know that on Life Enabled website, Brent has some prices and stuff, and that didn't really, it was like a high impact thing that didn't really seem like it cost a lot of money, and I think maybe in Myanmar they're even cheaper, right? So how much would these devices cost?
So we, I mean, it obviously varied from clinic to clinic, depending on, if they're providing housing for clients and stuff like that. But I mean, we're talking in the couple hundreds of dollars for a transtibial device. And so, yeah, $200, $300, $400, depending on where you're, what all your costs are. But yeah, I mean, the cost of, I wish they paid prosthetic clinicians way more than they do in Myanmar, but the reality is it doesn't cost that much to hire a prosthetic clinician. And so, yeah, I mean, it's really, compared to the thousands that we're used to hearing, say, hey, for a couple $100, we can break even on a transtibial device is feasible in some situations.
Okay, and for you, I think it's one interesting thing you started with. Actually, you said we learned the language. So it was your idea already before going there to learn the language. I think, would you say please do the same, or would you be like, no, you actually have to do the same, or is it not worth it to learn language? Let's say
there are different situations, I guess, but I for the situation we were in, I think that that was a non-negotiable for me. I think that one of the big things is even in training, I think for me it was really important that English capabilities were not a barrier to becoming a trained clinician. One of the things that I really wanted to prioritize was that we were finding people from the disability community to be part of the work. And a lot of those people in Myanmar weren't, their parents wouldn't put them in school, and have them finish school. And so if we want to meet people where they are and to be able to train people where they are, I think that's really valuable. But I think also just to be able to communicate with your clients in a way that feels comfortable to them, that's in their heart language, I think you get a much better rapport, but I think you also get a lot better feedback as far as what their goals are and what's wrong with the device, and they feel like they can share that with you. You're not this other guy who's hiding behind this translator or whatever. And so I think it's invaluable, that skill, and I'm really, really glad we did it. And yeah, I mean, obviously not everybody's going for 8 years, and so you have to kind of balance out where you're gonna put all your resources. But for us, that was, we were doing life there too. We were shopping at the market and things like that. So, I think that those kind of insights, we talked about designing this hand that Brent was working about, and, just knowing what the market's like, and the idea that, carrying something that can hold a 10-pound bag of rice while you're handing money with your sound limb, that, just being able to get into places and be able to see how people are living, I think that makes a massive difference, and language is definitely a key to unlocking a lot of that.
Okay, that's good to know. But it's also, I think it's really interesting. We keep talking here about 3D printing, but it seems like these guys could have really used a lathe, right? Yes. So maybe even if you would get a really old lathe, really, then I was always serious that the really old equipment that's made 100 years ago is meant to last and relatively simple. But a new lathe, from today, with lots of electronics on it and stuff like that, might actually break down a lot faster in the jungle. And so, but and we're also always kind of surrounded by these people who have this idea of we either ship the 3D printer there, or we bring it with you, or the people there learn how to print these things out. Okay, how realistic would that be in a place like Myanmar?
I think that. So we're getting started. So my colleague that's still there, I've been training a girl on Zoom, a Burmese girl, to run Fusion 360 and to run the printer, and we're getting, we're buying into it. So and I say that as somebody who used to laugh at donors, because they would all, my joke was always donors won't support this, this feeding the hungry unless you're 3D printing the spoon. They just had this obsession with seeing the best technology in the poorest places, or can we deliver this by drone instead of by hand, those kind of things. And so I was definitely, on that. I've experienced that, people just, we'll throw a ton of money at you if you want to do something high tech. And I was always really cautious about that. But I think that in our experience, I think when you're talking about like what does it look like to set up somebody, a local person with clinical skills, what does it look like to set up a clinic for them? Like, how do we bring down their overhead? How do we bring down the amount of space they need to move, to set up a clinic? How do we keep them from needing to find ways to get a 2 meter by 1 meter sheet of polypropylene into the country and all the way to their clinic? And I think, and some of the digital tools about having just digital files of people's limbs instead of needing to keep plaster dry through the rainy season. And I just think that a lot of the additive manufacturing space, just like it starts ticking a lot of those boxes to the point where it makes sense to give that a shot. And we struggle with keeping power on and needing to find these beefy UPSs to keep things running. And those are things we're not perfect at it yet. But I think that there's just a lot that 3D printing is able to do for if that's kind of your mindset, like okay, like like you were saying, what's kind of Brent's goal too is like how do we keep somebody here who's doing this and is able to keep producing. And I think additive manufacturing definitely makes a lot of sense in those kind of spaces.
All right. Okay. Hey, Jason, thank you so much for your time today. This is really great and really thrilling adventure, I think, that you've had there. And I think it's wonderful that you help so many people out.
No, I appreciate, just being able to share a little bit about our experience. And hopefully, if there's other people out there, I'm definitely willing to kind of talk them through it. And, if that's something that they think they want to do, there's definitely a huge need. And would love to connect with anyone.
All right. And Brent, thanks for being here as well.
Yeah, this was great. Thanks, Jason, for sharing your story and kind of the heartbeat behind it, and then really being flexible, and I think, yours, when I think of, listening to all of Jason's story and such, it really comes down, it's not about 3D printing or the technology or what have you. It really comes down to boots on the ground, training, and making good, sound clinical decisions. And really the manufacturing is secondary to all of that. So I think it's neat to hear the perspective of like, hey, being a clinician is important. Yes, the manufacturing side you have to take into consideration, but it's really how do we get to that patient outcome? But then, at the end, hearing Jason say, I really think that we can get to that good patient outcome by 3D printing. And there's definitely ways around. He mentioned UPS, battery backup system, solar, all that stuff to keep those machines going to have a great impact. And so I think there's a lot of neat things there to be able to take away. So yes, thank you, Jason.
All right. Sounds good. And we also have the news, the prosthetics and orthopedics news. And that is brought to us by our sponsor, Guest Poto. And Guest Poto is GS. Poto is a software package that automates a part of your workflow and helps you save time, making things a little bit more customizable, doing a lot of push button type of things. And Brent, you actually use it and you actually really like it, right?
Yeah, so right now it is mostly in the foot orthosis space. So you can really go from doing a foot orthosis in a lot of time, if you're doing Mesh Mixer or Fusion 360 or something like that, to not a lot of time in just Poto. It's literally just a few clicks and you've got something that you can not only mill, but you can FDM print, or you could print with powder bed fusion, right? I've got it right now, powder bed fusion style printers. And so Just Poto allows you to do all of them, and it's very automated just depending on which way you want to go. So I'm really excited about that. And then I'm excited about what they've got coming down the pike for automation of AFOs. And I think that's really going to be a big deal moving into the future, is this idea of automating some of these high volume devices, but being able to customize them at the same time. So, and Just Poto is going to do a good job doing that.
Okay, cool, man. That sounds really good. Okay, so the news. What is the news? Okay, this is the news that a Minneapolis-based startup called I don't know because it's it's fascicle. Fasikl. Fascicle. I don't know. But what are they launching? This startup is doing a mind-controlled prosthetic device, which apparently involves, it's a new way to control it, which involves Bluetooth and the MindForce nerve computer interface system and the Epione, I think, pain relief system. So MindForce is the idea is that through a computer, the device is controlled, and Epione is some kind of pain reduction technology. But you know a little bit more about this, right, Brent? What is this? And because it sounds, kind of robotically fantastical, but what is it actually?
Well, I think what's interesting about all this is that implant to control the hand is a Class 3 device, which is a high-risk device that has to go through a pre-approval process, which potentially could take years. But the neat thing is that it's on the FDA's radar. And I think it's going to be very, very interesting. We've had a deal from Psionic. That hand was so fast. And imagine a hand like that being attached to something that can be controlled by the brain. And it looks like they have a hand as well, or it might be just the implant. I can't tell quite what they've got going, but I'm really excited to see where this goes because upper extremity has always been a difficult area to play in orthotics and prosthetics because it's usually tool-based or adaptive-based, but never like the combination of everything. And if you can think it and make the hand go the way that you're thinking, that's going to be a game changer for sure.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's great that you pointed out, by the way, that the approval process might take a long. These guys must have a ton of money as well because this is going to be incredibly expensive. So the that could take a long time for them to actually put this in patients' hands, let's say. And but this is kind of the future, the more of the future that we wanted to see. So yeah, it could be really amazing, I think.
Yeah, agreed. And let's wait and see. It'll be this definitely puts it on our radar as far as a company to follow as they're growing.
All right, cool. This is another edition of the Prosthetics and Orthotics podcast, and you have a great day.